The Apache woman said to the cowboy, "Share the bed with me or freeze." He pulled his coat tighter, the wind biting at his face, and tightened the reins. The sun had long disappeared behind low clouds, leaving the sky a pale gray and a cold that seemed to seep into every bone. The cowboy had traveled these plains all his life, but this winter was harsher than most. He had made many trips across the open land, but tonight felt different. He had the uneasy feeling that something was waiting, just out of sight, something that needed his attention. As he rounded a low ridge, his eyes caught a movement against the snow. At first he thought it was a drift of wind or a stray branch, but then he saw it clearly, a figure, stumbling and weak, moving with difficulty through the thick snow. He slowed his horse, squinting against the flurry. It was a woman. She was alone, her clothing thin and ragged, far too little for the freezing night. Her head bent forward as she moved, her dark hair whipping across her face in the icy wind. Every few steps she stopped, clutching her arms to her chest, shivering violently. The cowboy's heart tightened. He had seen people struggle against the elements before, but rarely anyone like her. She did not cry for help, did not shout. She simply moved forward, determined, even as the cold threatened to pull her down. Something in her eyes caught his attention, a mix of strength, fear, and desperation. He knew instantly that she would not survive the night without help. Without thinking twice, he urged his horse closer. "Hey, hold on," he called out, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. The woman froze, her head snapping up, eyes wide. They were dark, alert, and sharp, watching him with a mixture of fear and caution. She did not speak at first, only took another weak step forward. Her lips were blue and her skin pale against the snow. The cowboy noticed a small bundle in her arms, wrapped in cloth. Perhaps a child, perhaps her belongings, he could not tell. "Are you all right?" he shouted, keeping his voice steady, trying to sound friendly. "You can't stay out here like this." She paused, looking at him closely. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind howled between them, filling the silence. Then she said something softly, her voice almost lost in the cold. I must keep moving," she said. The words were firm, even though her body trembled. She tried to step past him, but the snow slowed her, and she stumbled again. The cowboy dismounted quickly, his boots crunching in the snow. He approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You can't make it out there tonight," he said. "It's too cold, you'll freeze." Her eyes narrowed. I cannot stop," she whispered, shaking. Her teeth chattered, and the cowboy could see how weak she was. Every step she took seemed to demand all the strength she had. "If I rest, I will not wake." The cowboy felt a pang in his chest. He had faced many dangers on the plains, storms, wild animals, even bandits, but nothing compared to the fear in her eyes. He could not leave her here to die. Yet he also sensed her pride, her refusal to ask for help lightly. She was not used to depending on anyone. He knew that offering help would be difficult for her to accept. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "Come with me. I have a cabin just a mile from here. You can warm up, get out of this storm." She hesitated, glancing toward the horizon, where the wind blew endlessly over the plains. I cannot," she said, her voice barely audible. I must keep going." The cowboy knelt down slightly, looking her in the eyes. "If you stay out here, you won't make it," he said firmly. "I've seen the snow take people in less than an hour. You need shelter, you need warmth. Come with me, please." For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes darted toward the snow, toward the cold night, and then back at him. He could see the internal struggle, the battle between her pride and her need to survive. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time. "If I go with you, will it be enough?" "It will be enough," he said. "I promise, you'll be safe." Her lips pressed together. She studied him, the kind of look that belonged to someone who had lived a hard life and had learned not to trust easily. But the shivering betrayed her resolve. Slowly, she nodded. "All right, I will come." The cowboy helped her onto his horse carefully, guiding her so she would not fall. He noticed her arms trembling violently as she held herself against the cold. Her fingers were blue, and the tips looked almost numb. He wrapped his coat around her, holding it tightly to shield her from the wind. She leaned slightly against him, but her eyes remained alert, scanning the darkness around them. As they rode through the snow, the cowboy tried to make small conversation. "Where are you headed?" he asked gently. She shook her head. It is not safe to say," she whispered. I must keep moving." He nodded, respecting her privacy. "All right," he said. "We'll just get you warm for tonight." The cabin was a small, wooden structure built by the cowboy himself years ago. It had a low roof and a stone fireplace, the smoke curling into the dark sky. When they arrived, he helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The warmth hit her immediately and she gasped softly, the color returning to her cheeks slowly. He could see the relief in her eyes, though she tried to hide it behind a cautious expression. The cabin was simple, with only one bed and a small fire. The cowboy set down some blankets and gestured for her to sit. "You'll be safe here tonight," he said. "I'll build the fire up and you can warm yourself." She hesitated, glancing at the single bed. There is only one," she asked softly, almost in disbelief. He nodded. "Yes, but it's warm, that's what matters." Her gaze met his, and for a moment the tension in the room was thick. Then, with quiet honesty, she said something that made him stop. "Share the bed with me or freeze," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. The cowboy froze, unsure how to respond. He could see she was serious, and the way she spoke left no room for argument. Outside, the wind howled and snow piled against the walls. Inside, the fire was warm, but the night promised no mercy. He realized that she was not asking lightly. This was a matter of life or death. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll do what we must to stay alive." She let out a soft breath, relief washing over her face. She moved to the bed, careful not to make sudden movements, and the cowboy followed, setting aside pride and social norms for the sake of survival. They huddled under the blankets, close enough to share warmth, yet careful to respect each other's space. As the night wore on, the wind outside seemed louder, more threatening. But inside the cabin, a fragile safety existed. The cowboy noticed the strength in her eyes, the way she endured hardship without complaint. She shared quiet stories of the plains, of survival of life in the harshest conditions imaginable. He listened, sharing small details of his own life, and slowly, a bond formed, built on necessity, courage, and respect. For the first time that night, the woman allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The cowboy stayed silent, offering presence rather than words. The snow continued to fall outside, relentless and cold, but inside the cabin, two strangers found warmth, hope, and an unlikely trust. By the time morning light crept through the small window, the woman was rested, her cheeks pink, her eyes alert. She no longer looked like someone about to succumb to the winter. She looked alive, ready to face the world again. And the cowboy, watching her, realized that this night, though born of desperation, had changed him in ways he could not yet understand. Outside, like a blanket of silver, the woman stirred under the covers, her breath still coming in soft, uneven puffs. She moved carefully, not wanting to disturb the cowboy, who had been awake before her, tending the fire. The warmth from the flames filled the cabin, chasing away the bite of the cold outside, but the memory of the freezing night still lingered in her bones. She rubbed her arms, trying to wake the circulation into her fingers, and finally lifted her gaze toward him. The cowboy watched her quietly. There was no awkwardness in his glance, only concern. He had seen many people in his life who had been battered by the winter, but few with such determination to survive. Her eyes met his for a moment, sharp and alert, yet tinged with gratitude. She did not speak immediately, and the cowboy gave her the space to adjust to the warmth. He knew that trust, fragile as it was, could not be rushed. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and careful. The snow, it was worse than I imagined, she said, almost as if admitting it to herself. I thought I might not make it. You would not have, the cowboy replied honestly. Not without shelter, not without warmth. His voice carried no judgment, only a quiet certainty. The wind out there is merciless this time of year. I've crossed it before, and it will take anyone unprepared. She nodded, pressing her lips together as if to hold back further words. There was pride in her, he could see, the kind of pride that had kept her alive through countless dangers. Yet now, in the cabin, she allowed herself to feel something softer, relief, perhaps even trust. The cowboy broke the silence with a practical tone. We'll need to eat something before the snow gets worse again. There's bread, some jerky, and water in the jug over there. He gestured to the corner of the cabin where a small supply had been kept. You'll need strength if you plan to keep moving after this storm. She moved slowly, her steps careful on the wooden floor, and took the bread he offered. She did not speak, only nodded in acknowledgement, but the gratitude in her eyes was unmistakable. She broke the bread into small pieces, savoring each bite, her body still stiff from the night's cold. The cowboy watched her, thinking about how few people in the world would survive alone in the snow like this. She was quiet but not weak, quiet but far from fragile. After a while she asked, her voice soft but curious, "Who are you? Why do you help strangers like me?" The cowboy leaned against the wooden wall, letting his gaze drift to the snow outside. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I've been alone out here long enough to know what it feels like to need help. Maybe because it's right. I don't know how to leave someone to die if I can stop it." Her eyes studied him, trying to see if he spoke the truth. She remained silent for a long moment, and then, almost reluctantly, she said, I have never met someone who would help without asking anything in return. Out there, people, they usually demand something or they leave you behind." The cowboy nodded slowly. "This world can be hard, but it doesn't have to be all that way. Not everyone is cruel." She considered his words, her gaze dropping to the floor. Then she looked up, sharper this time, as if making a decision. "Then I will trust you for now," she said, and the corner of her lips lifted just slightly. It was the first sign of warmth that wasn't from the fire. The hours passed slowly. The storm outside continued its relentless march, the wind rattling the walls, snow piling against the cabin door. Inside, the cowboy stoked the fire, keeping the warmth steady, while the woman unpacked a small bundle she had carried. It contained a few personal belongings, a worn scarf, a small knife, and a tiny pouch of dried herbs. She handled each item carefully as if they were treasures, and the cowboy watched, curious but respectful of her space. "You carry little," he remarked gently. "Everything you need is in that bundle," she shook her head. "No," she admitted, "most things I leave behind, only what is necessary, what keeps me alive." She looked up at him, her eyes wary but honest. "It is not much, but it is mine." The cowboy nodded. He had learned long ago that the things people carry tell their stories. This woman had survived alone for a long time, he realized. She had endured harsh winters, scarce food, and the dangers of the plains. Yet here she was, refusing to give up, still moving forward despite everything. There was a strength in her that commanded respect. Eventually, they began to talk more. At first, the conversation was cautious, filled with small details and generalities. She spoke of the plains, of the forests and rivers she had crossed, of the animals she had seen in the snow. He shared stories of ranch life, of the seasons, and the work it took to maintain the land. Though the words were simple, the connection grew with each passing hour. There was a rhythm to their exchange, a quiet understanding that did not need grand gestures or declarations. As the afternoon approached, the woman stood by the window, staring at the endless white world outside. "The snow, it will trap travelers for days," she murmured. "It is dangerous. Many people do not survive the storms." The cowboy joined her, placing a hand on the window frame. "Not everyone survives," he said, But those who do, they find ways to endure. You've already done that. That's why you're here inside instead of out there in the cold. She looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. I survived, but only because of you, she admitted quietly. Without your help, I would not have lasted the night. The cowboy shrugged, brushing off the compliment. I only did what had to be done. Anyone else would have, that's all. But she shook her head, firm and certain. No, most would not. Most see someone struggling and pass by. They do not stop. They do not care. You cared. That is rare. There was a silence after that. The wind outside howled, rattling the small cabin, but inside, a quiet warmth persisted. The woman's words lingered in the air, not as a praise, but as a truth he could not deny. Night began to fall again, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The woman moved to the fire, warming her hands, and the cowboy noticed her relax slightly, the tension of survival easing with each passing hour. Yet there was still a carefulness to her movements, a watchfulness that spoke of years spent relying on her own strength. I should not trouble you further, she said, almost reluctantly. I do not want to impose. You are not a trouble, the cowboy replied firmly. You are a guest, and tonight the fire, the cabin, and the blankets, they are meant to keep you alive. That is not trouble. That is what matters. She looked at him, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition of shared humanity, of the quiet respect that forms between strangers in moments of need. She nodded, understanding without words. Hours passed, and the storm outside raged harder, snow swirling like a white curtain. But inside the cabin, they sat together by the fire, eating the small meal the cowboy had prepared. They spoke of simple things, the patterns of the snow, the way animals adapted to the cold, memories of places they had both known. Laughter was rare, but it appeared in small moments, like sparks from the fire. At one point, the woman looked at the cowboy and spoke softly, almost as if testing him. Do you ever fear the cold? He paused, thinking. Of course. I have crossed frozen rivers, ridden in storms that made me think I would not make it, but fear, it is different from despair. Fear can be faced. Despair, that takes everything from you. The cold, it can be beaten if you do not give up. She considered this, then nodded slowly. You are brave, she said, her words simple but carrying weight. Most people would have left me. The cowboy shook his head. Bravery, it is not always about fighting. Sometimes it is about standing still and doing what is right, even if it is hard. The woman remained silent, the words sinking in. She had learned long ago to survive with skill and strength, but here was something different, a lesson in trust, in relying on another without losing her own strength. The warmth of the fire, the presence of another human, even one she barely knew, was a strange comfort. As the night deepened, they prepared for sleep again. The woman glanced at the single bed, then back at the cowboy. There was no shame in her eyes, only practicality. If we stay alive tonight, she said softly, we must keep close. The cold, it will not forgive carelessness. The cowboy nodded. Agreed. They arranged the blankets carefully, ensuring maximum warmth, and settled side by side, keeping the distance respectful but close enough to survive the night. Outside, the storm howled, a reminder of the peril that still awaited them. Inside, there was only quiet trust, a fragile but growing connection, and the shared understanding that survival sometimes demands courage in ways neither had expected. And as they drifted into an uneasy sleep, both knew that the night had changed something within them, an acknowledgement that life, even in its harshest form, could bring people together in ways the heart could never predict. The night deepened, and outside, the storm raged with a strength that seemed almost alive. The wind howled, whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls, and snow drifted against the door and windows in relentless waves. Inside, the small room was filled with the soft crackle of the fire and the rhythmic ticking of the cabin's old clock. The cowboy and the woman lay under the blankets, their bodies pressed together for warmth, each careful to respect the other's space while still sharing the comfort that the cold demanded. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sounds were the occasional snap of a log in the fireplace and the subtle rustle of blankets as they adjusted to keep warm. The woman's dark eyes watched the fire, observing its flickering light on the walls, while the cowboy stared quietly at the small window, listening to the storm beyond. Though the night was silent, a tension lingered, not of fear but of awareness, awareness of life, of survival, and of the fragile trust forming between them. Finally she spoke, her voice low and careful, almost hesitant. "I have never been cared for like this," she said, her eyes not meeting his. "Not like this, where no one demands anything, no one questions me, only offers warmth." The cowboy remained silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. Then he said softly, "Sometimes people just need someone to notice they exist, that's all. The world is harsh, yes, but it is not without kindness, not completely." She turned her gaze toward him, studying his face in the dim firelight. "Kindness is rare," she murmured. "I have seen too little of it." "You've seen too little because most people never look," he replied gently. "But that does not mean it doesn't exist. It can be quiet, almost invisible, but it is there if you look for it." The woman nodded slowly, considering his words. For someone who had spent her life relying only on herself, these words were strange, almost foreign. She had learned to trust only her own strength, her own skill, and her own instincts. Yet now in the small cabin, warmed by the fire and the presence of another human being, she felt something shift, a cautious, unfamiliar sense of hope. Hours passed as they stayed near the fire, talking in quiet tones. She shared fragments of her past, the stories of her life as an Apache woman navigating the hardships of the plains. She spoke of winters harsher than this one, of nights spent hiding in forests and hills, of rivers crossed and dangers faced. Her voice was steady, calm, and filled with quiet pride, even as she recounted the moments that had tested her most. The cowboy listened, fascinated and respectful. He did not interrupt except to ask gentle questions or to offer small insights from his own life. He spoke of the plains, of the ranch, of days spent riding through the open land, repairing fences, tending livestock, and facing challenges that, while different from hers, required their own courage. Though their experiences were different, he felt a growing admiration for her resilience, and she, in turn, began to recognize in him a steadfast reliability, a quiet strength that could be trusted. As the hours crept on, the conversation shifted from survival stories to simpler things, memories of childhood, favorite places, small joys. The woman spoke of streams where the water ran cold and clear, of the sound of birds in the early morning, of the smell of wild herbs growing along the riverbanks. The cowboy shared the routines of ranch life, of mornings spent riding horses, of the warmth of a fire after a long day, and the satisfaction of small accomplishments. Laughter began to appear in small doses, soft and tentative at first but gradually stronger, like sparks from the fire warming the room. The night was long, and at one point a pause fell over them. The woman leaned back against the wall, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight, and sighed softly. "It is strange," she said after a moment, "to feel warmth not just from the fire but from being with another person. I have never felt this before." The cowboy looked at her, understanding her meaning without needing explanation. "It is not easy," he said softly, "to trust, to allow another human in, but sometimes survival demands more than strength. It demands openness. It demands letting someone help you without losing your own sense of self." She studied him in the firelight, the shadows moving across his face. I have always relied on myself," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But tonight, I understand that some things cannot be faced alone." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the storm outside. The wind rattled the walls, snow pressed against the door, and the world beyond the cabin seemed cold, relentless, and unyielding. Yet inside there was a fragile warmth, a connection built not just on necessity, but on mutual recognition of courage, resilience, and humanity. Eventually, the woman moved closer to the fire, her hands outstretched to catch the heat. The cowboy offered a small smile, adjusting the blankets so they could both stay warm. The night was far from over, and the cold was still a threat, but within the cabin, a quiet understanding had formed. They were not just surviving the storm. They were learning from it, learning from each other, and discovering that companionship could be found even in the most unlikely circumstances. As the hours passed, the woman began to share more of her life, revealing the softer sides of herself that she rarely let others see. She spoke of her family, of people she had cared for and lost, of the joys and sorrows that had shaped her into the woman she was. The cowboy listened, offering gentle acknowledgement, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking questions to better understand. He realized that she had survived not only the elements but the hardships of life itself, and her courage was inspiring. In turn, he shared memories of his own life, times of hardship, moments of unexpected kindness, and the lessons learned from years on the plains. Though their worlds were different, he sensed that she understood, that the human experience was universal in many ways. They found comfort in each other's stories, each tale creating a thread of connection stronger than either had expected. Night grew deeper, and fatigue began to creep in, but neither wanted to end the conversation. There was something precious in these moments, a bond forming in the quiet of survival, and both were aware of it. Finally, they fell into a companionable silence, each lost in thought, yet aware of the other's presence. The fire burned low, casting gentle shadows, and outside the storm continued to rage, a reminder of the world they had survived together so far. At one point, the woman spoke softly, almost to herself. "I never thought I would trust anyone again. Not after everything I've seen, everything I've faced, but tonight I feel safe. Somehow I feel that I am not alone." The cowboy's eyes softened. "You are not alone," he said, "not while I am here. And not because of me alone, but because survival is sometimes about finding the right company, even in the harshest places." She nodded slowly, a quiet understanding passing between them. The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. For someone who had lived a life of constant struggle, this night represented something she had never experienced before. Trust without expectation, warmth without demand, and the fragile, quiet strength of human connection. As the night drew on, they prepared to rest again, careful to maintain warmth while giving each other space. The woman glanced at the single bed, then at the cowboy, and without a word, they arranged the blankets once more. The fire crackled softly, the shadows dancing across the walls, and the storm outside continued to howl. Yet inside, they found a fragile peace, a moment of quiet amidst the chaos of the world beyond. Sleep eventually took them both, light and uneven at first, punctuated by the occasional crack of the fire or gust of wind against the cabin. In those hours, they dreamed not just of survival, but of possibility, of a world where courage, trust, and kindness could coexist even in the harshest of circumstances. And when morning light crept again through the window, both awoke with a renewed sense of strength, a deeper trust, and an understanding that the night had changed them both in ways they would not soon forget. The night of survival had not only kept them alive, but had created a bond that neither had expected. They were no longer simply a cowboy and a stranger. They were companions, united by the cold, by necessity, and by the quiet courage of enduring together. And though the storm outside would not last forever, the lessons of the night, trust, resilience, and shared humanity would remain with them for a lifetime. The first light of dawn crept slowly across the plains, spilling pale gold into the cabin through the small, frost-covered window. Outside, the snow had slowed to a gentle fall, soft flakes drifting lazily down from a sky that was beginning to clear. The storm that had battered the plains through the night had left the world outside serene, almost peaceful, yet the memory of its cold fury lingered in every corner of the cabin. Inside, the woman stirred under the blankets, her dark hair falling across her face. She stretched her arms carefully, savoring the warmth that surrounded her. The night had been long, and the cold had been merciless, but she had survived it, and for the first time in many months, perhaps even years, she felt safe. The cowboy was already awake, tending the fire with quiet care. He had not slept deeply, knowing the storm outside still held danger, but his mind was calm. He watched the flames dance, reflecting on the events of the past night, on the choices that had been made, and on the stranger who now occupied a place in his cabin. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "The fire, it kept me alive," she said, her eyes meeting his. I am grateful. I do not know what would have happened without it." "You would not have made it through the night alone," the cowboy replied honestly. "The snow, it is unforgiving. Even strong people cannot survive its bite unprepared." She nodded, the weight of her own survival settling in her chest. "I owe you much," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I owe you my life." The cowboy shook his head, brushing aside the comment. "You owe me nothing. You survived because you acted. You came here. You trusted enough to accept help. That is what matters. That is what saved you." For a moment, silence settled over them. Outside, the snow lay thick and untouched, blanketing the plains in a quiet peace. Inside, there was the smell of smoke, the faint scent of bread and jerky left from their small meal, and the warmth that had made the night survivable. The woman looked at the cowboy, studying his face in the soft morning light. There was a thoughtfulness in her expression, a recognition of something steady and reliable, a presence that could be trusted when the world offered nothing but danger. After a pause, she asked, "What will you do now?" Her voice carried no judgment, only curiosity tinged with caution. The cowboy considered her question. "I will continue my routine," he said. "The ranch needs tending, fences repaired, livestock fed. But after last night, I suppose I will carry the memory of this encounter with me. It is rare to meet someone so determined, so brave, and yet so human." The woman allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since they met. "I have not known kindness like this in a long time," she admitted. "People, they usually take, or they demand, or they look away. You did none of that. You only offered warmth and safety. That is all any of us can do," he said simply. "Sometimes it is enough. Sometimes that is what saves lives." They prepared to face the day together, gathering what few supplies remained in the cabin and ensuring the fire was safely contained. The snow outside glistened under the weak sunlight, and the wind had calmed to a gentle breeze. Yet both knew that the storm had not truly ended. The plains were still dangerous, and decisions had to be made carefully. The woman packed her small bundle, folding her scarf and tucking it carefully alongside the small pouch of herbs and the knife she always carried. She paused, her eyes meeting the cowboy's once more. "I cannot stay here," she said. "I have a path I must follow, people to reach, places to survive. I am grateful, but I cannot linger." The cowboy nodded, understanding her resolve. "I expected as much." But he hesitated, thinking of the warmth of the past hours, of the trust that had grown between them, and the fragility of the bond they had formed. "But you must know, you do not have to face the snow alone if you cannot. There is food, warmth, and shelter here for as long as you need it." She shook her head gently. "I cannot impose on your life. I must continue. You have already given me more than anyone else ever has." They stepped outside together, the fresh snow crunching beneath their boots. The plains stretched endlessly, white and shining, and the sunlight reflected off the snow in sharp brilliance. It was beautiful, yet merciless in its cold. The woman adjusted her cloak against the wind, her face pale but determined. The cowboy noticed the small movements, the careful way she balanced herself, the way her eyes scanned the horizon. She was cautious, alert, yet there was a quiet confidence in her step. "Do you need directions?" he asked, careful not to sound patronizing. She shook her head. "I know the land," she replied. "I have crossed these plains before, though never in such a storm. I can manage." He studied her for a moment, impressed. Few people could claim such skill and resilience. "Very well," he said. "Then go safely. And remember, you are not alone. Even when the wind bites, even when the snow blinds, you have someone who knows you survived. That counts for something." She gave him a small nod, her dark eyes reflecting both gratitude and something more, perhaps respect, perhaps the faintest trace of connection that had formed between them. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will not forget this night." The cowboy watched as she disappeared into the snow, her figure gradually blending into the white horizon. For a long time he stood there, silent, feeling the weight of the night, the storm, and the small miracle of survival. The world was harsh, unyielding, and indifferent, yet here was proof that courage, kindness, and trust could endure even in the worst conditions. When he returned to the cabin, he tended to the small chores that could not wait. The fire needed attention, the supplies needed checking, and the ranch, miles away, required preparation for the harsh day ahead. Yet his thoughts lingered on the woman, on the quiet trust that had formed, and on the realization that even in isolation, even in a world so vast and dangerous, human connection could emerge in the most unexpected ways. The morning passed slowly. The storm's remnants left the plains treacherous in places, snowdrifts hiding frozen streams and uneven ground. The cowboy took extra care in traveling, thinking often of the woman and the challenges she would face. Each step reminded him of the fragility of life and the courage it took to endure. He wondered if she had made it safely past the most dangerous parts of the plains, if the warmth and trust from the night had carried her through the day. Even as he worked, he reflected on the moral lessons of the night. He had faced a choice, one that some would have avoided out of fear, pride, or habit, and he had chosen to act with humanity. It had been simple in principle, yet difficult in execution. He had offered warmth, shelter, and protection to someone who had every reason to distrust the world, and in return, he had received the rare gift of trust and respect. That was a debt not measured in currency, but in something far more lasting, acknowledgement of human courage and shared survival. By midday, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the snow and illuminating the rugged landscape. The plains were calm, almost silent, yet the cowboy knew the dangers were still present. Hidden ice, sudden drifts, and the bitter cold could claim anyone unprepared. He packed what supplies he could carry and prepared to ride toward the ranch, thinking of the woman and hoping that she had continued on safely, guided by her own skill and by the small warmth she had carried from the cabin. Even as he rode, memories of the night stayed with him, the quiet moments by the fire, the conversations about survival, trust, and life, the small laughter that had punctuated the long hours. He realized that survival was not just about enduring the storm. It was about connection, about understanding, about the courage to act with integrity even when the consequences were uncertain. The woman had reminded him of this truth, and in doing so had left an indelible mark on his life. By late afternoon, the cowboy reached the edge of the plains where the ranch began, the familiar outlines of fences, barns, and corrals breaking the endless white of the snow. He felt a quiet satisfaction at returning to safety, yet his mind lingered on the woman's path, on the choices they had both made, and on the bond forged in a single night of survival. It was a bond built not on convenience, not on obligation, but on the mutual acknowledgement of courage, humanity, and trust. As he settled into the routine of the ranch, he reflected on the lessons of the night. True courage was not in facing danger alone. It was in recognizing when help was needed and offering it without expectation. True trust was not blind, it was earned, and it could flourish even in the harshest of circumstances. And true survival, he realized, was as much about the connections we form as the strength we carry. And somewhere across the plains, the woman continued her journey. She carried warmth in her heart, a memory of kindness that had allowed her to endure, and a newfound respect for the possibilities of human connection. Though the world remained harsh, she now understood that trust, courage, and compassion could exist even in the coldest and most unforgiving places. The morning after the storm had passed, the plains were quiet, almost impossibly still. Snow glistened under the early sun, stretching endlessly in every direction, a brilliant white landscape untouched by footprints. The air was cold, crisp, and clean, yet the world seemed renewed, as though the storm had cleared not only the sky but also the tension that had lingered through the long night. Inside the cabin, the cowboy and the woman prepared for the day. The fire had burned low, leaving only warm embers that glowed softly, and the blankets had been folded neatly, a small comfort in the aftermath of survival. The woman moved with careful precision, packing her small bundle and checking the scarf, knife, and pouch of herbs that had been her constant companions. She looked strong, confident, and ready to continue her journey, yet there was a softness in her expression that had not been there when they first met. The cowboy watched her quietly. There were many thoughts in his mind, reflections on the storm, on the night of survival, and on the rare connection that had formed between them. He had faced dangers before, storms and wild animals alike, but few encounters had left such a deep mark on his heart. He could see in her eyes the courage that had carried her through countless challenges, and he felt a quiet pride that he had been able to offer help when it mattered most. "I should go," she said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but her eyes lingered on the cowboy for a moment longer than necessary. "I cannot stay. There are places I must reach, people I must see. I am grateful for everything you have done." "You don't have to thank me," the cowboy replied, his voice calm and deliberate. "You survived because you were brave, because you acted when it mattered. I only offered shelter, that is all." She shook her head, a small, thoughtful smile playing on her lips. "No. You did more than that. You gave me life, not just warmth. You offered trust when it was most needed. That is something I will never forget." There was a pause, a quiet moment in which the weight of the night, the storm, and their shared survival hung between them. The cowboy wanted to say more, to offer reassurance, perhaps even guidance, but he understood that this was her journey, her path to continue alone. Survival often demanded independence, and he would not stand in the way of her strength. "Will you be safe?" he asked quietly. "The plains, even after the storm, they can be unforgiving," she nodded. "I know. I have crossed them many times before. The snow will be my challenge, yes, but I am prepared. And the memory of this place and your help will carry me." The cowboy felt a weight lift in his chest. It was relief, yes, but also a sense of completion. Their night together had been intense, dangerous, and transformative, and now, as she prepared to leave, he realized that their brief encounter would leave a lasting mark on both their lives. They stepped outside together. The air was bright, cold, and refreshing, carrying the scent of snow and the faint tang of smoke from the cabin. The plains stretched endlessly, and the woman adjusted her cloak against the chill. She paused at the edge of the small path leading away from the cabin, her eyes scanning the horizon with the sharp awareness of someone who had survived countless challenges. "Will I see you again?" she asked softly, almost uncertain. The cowboy considered her question. "Perhaps," he replied. "Perhaps the plains will bring us together again, but even if they do not, know that your courage and strength will remain with me." She smiled, a gentle, rare smile that seemed to reflect both relief and gratitude. "Then I will continue my journey with the memory of this night." With that, she began to walk toward the distant horizon, her figure gradually becoming smaller against the white expanse of snow. Each step was careful, deliberate, and confident. The cowboy watched her until she disappeared from view, the wind carrying faint traces of her presence. He returned to the cabin, closing the door against the chill, and took a long moment to reflect. The past night had tested both their limits, the cold, the storm, and the harshness of the plains, but it had also revealed the extraordinary resilience of human beings. He thought of her courage, the way she had faced the storm without complaint, and the quiet strength that had carried her through. He realized that survival was not just about skill or preparation. It was about courage, trust, and the willingness to rely on others when necessary. As the day passed, he tended to the small chores that awaited him at the cabin. The fire needed rebuilding, supplies needed checking, and the land needed preparation for the harsh winter days ahead. Yet in every task, his thoughts returned to the woman and the lessons she had unwittingly taught him. Life could be unforgiving, yes, but it could also bring moments of unexpected connection, moments that revealed courage, resilience, and humanity in its purest forms. By afternoon, he mounted his horse to ride toward the ranch. The snow crunched beneath the hooves, and the wind carried the soft whispers of the plains. He rode slowly, reflecting on the journey of the night, the shared moments of silence and conversation, and the trust that had grown between them. It was a trust forged in necessity, yes, but strengthened by respect and understanding. Along the way, he considered the choices they had both made. The woman had chosen to survive, to trust when trust was difficult, and to accept help when pride might have demanded refusal. He had chosen to act with humanity, to offer aid without expectation, and to face the uncertainties of the storm alongside her. These choices, simple in principle but profound in consequence, had shaped the events of the night and left both of them changed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered plains, he reached the familiar boundaries of his ranch. The fences, barns, and livestock were all as he had left them, but his perspective had shifted. He understood now, more deeply than ever, that life's most valuable lessons often came from unexpected encounters, moments of crisis, and the courage to act rightly when the outcome was uncertain. That evening, as he sat by the fire in his cabin, he thought of the woman once more. He imagined her walking across the plains, strong and determined, carrying with her the warmth, trust, and kindness they had shared. He felt a quiet hope that she would continue to survive, to thrive, and to encounter more kindness in the world. For the cowboy, the memory of the night remained vivid. The storm, the snow, the fear of death, and the fragile bond that had formed, all of it stayed with him, shaping his understanding of human connection. He realized that even in a world filled with danger and uncertainty, courage, trust, and compassion could emerge, creating moments that were small yet powerful, fleeting yet unforgettable. Days passed, and life on the ranch returned to its routine. Yet the encounter with the woman lingered in his mind. He thought of her resilience, her bravery, and the quiet strength that had carried her through the storm. He understood now that true survival was not merely enduring the elements. It was the courage to trust, the willingness to accept help, and the capacity to act with compassion when others needed it most. Months later, he would recall that night often, not as a tale of danger or fear, but as a story of human connection, resilience, and shared survival. He would tell himself that even in the coldest, harshest, and most unforgiving circumstances, acts of kindness and trust could endure, creating bonds that changed lives forever. And somewhere across the plains, the woman continued her journey. She carried with her not only the memory of warmth and survival, but also the knowledge that trust, courage, and human connection could exist even in the harshest conditions. She had survived the storm, yes, but she had also discovered that even a fleeting encounter could leave a lasting mark, a reminder that the world, while harsh, still held moments of unexpected kindness and hope. In the end, both the cowboy and the woman had been changed by that single night of snow and survival. It was a night that tested their limits, challenged their fears, and strengthened their courage. It was a night that taught them that even strangers could become allies, that trust could emerge where none was expected, and that humanity, in its simplest forms, could endure even in the coldest winters. And though the plains would continue to be harsh, unpredictable, and unyielding, both knew that they had survived together. And that survival was not simply about enduring the storm, but about the courage to act, the trust to accept help, and the quiet strength of human connection. That could last a lifetime,